Jordan Boyd's stomach churns as he watches two Katorian warriors clash in a savage mating ritual. The human diplomat stands frozen at the edge of the arena on Taria Prime, his mission to negotiate a trade agreement forgotten in the face of this brutal spectacle. Violet blood splatters across the sandy floor as the combatants, a male and female Katarian, tear into each other with razor-sharp claws. Their elongated serpentine bodies twist and coil, powerful tails lashing out with bone-crushing force. Jordan's eyes widen in horror as he realizes he's grossly miscalculated the nature of this alien species. The female Katarian gains the upper hand, pinning her male opponent beneath her. She rears back, preparing to deliver a lethal strike. In that moment, Jordan makes a decision that will alter the course of human-Katarian relations forever. He vaults over the barrier and sprints into the arena, ignoring the shocked gasps and protests from his human colleagues. As he rushes toward the combatants, Jordan knows he's violating sacred Tarian law. He's risking not only his own life, but Earth's standing in the galactic community. The victorious female Tarian, Lyra, whips her head around at Jordan's approach. Her alien eyes narrow, body coiling as she prepares to strike this new challenger. Jordan skids to a halt, raising his hands in what he hopes is a universal gesture of peace. "Wait," he shouts, desperately trying to find words to bridge the vast gulf between their species. "There's another way." From their elevated platforms, the Katarian High Council signals for Jordan's immediate execution. Guards move to seize the human interloper, who dared interfere in their most sacred tradition. Jordan's heart pounds as he realizes he has mere seconds to save himself and potentially reshape Tarian society. "Humans mate without violence," he blurts out, the words tumbling from his lips. "We use courtship, intimacy, affection, not combat." His explanation causes visible confusion among the Tarians. The concept of reproduction without bloodshed is utterly foreign to them. Lyra tilts her head, intrigued by Jordan's words. She calls for the guards to halt, her sibilant voice carrying authority. "Demonstrate," she commands, presenting Jordan with an unprecedented opportunity. The High Council confers briefly before reluctantly agreeing to Lyra's request. They grant Jordan one solar cycle to prove the validity of his claims. If he fails, death awaits. As the arena falls silent, the weight of Jordan's task settles upon him. He must introduce the concept of love and gentle intimacy to a species that has only known violence as a means of reproduction. The fate of Earth-Katarian relations hangs in the balance. Jordan takes a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. He has one chance to show this alien species something better than combat, to prove that tenderness can be more powerful than aggression. As he locks eyes with Lyra, a spark of understanding passes between them. Perhaps, Jordan thinks, there's hope for connection after all. Jordan's eyes locked with Lyra's, and in that moment, he knew his journey was only beginning. The arena fell silent as guards approached, their movements cautious yet purposeful. "Come," one of the guards hissed, gesturing for Jordan to follow. "The High Council awaits." Jordan cast a final glance at Lyra before allowing himself to be led away. The Katarian female's gaze followed him, a mixture of curiosity and something unidentifiable in her alien eyes. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Jordan found himself ushered through winding corridors of the Katarian capital complex, his mind racing to process the magnitude of what he'd set in motion. Finally, he was brought before the High Council, their elongated forms towering over him from elevated platforms. The lead counselor, a Katarian with deep purple scales, addressed Jordan. "Human, you claim to possess knowledge of a different way. We grant you one solar cycle to demonstrate these practices." Jordan nodded, his throat dry. "Thank you, esteemed council. I will do my best to show you the ways of human courtship and mating." "You will be provided with a specially prepared chamber," another counselor explained. "It has been designed to simulate your Earth environment." As Jordan was escorted to this new location, he couldn't help but marvel at the Katarians' efficiency. The chamber, when he entered it, was a startling slice of Earth amid the alien architecture. Familiar furnishings, objects, and even plants filled the space, creating an uncanny sense of home. Jordan had little time to acclimate before the door slid open again, revealing Lyra. She slithered into the room, her iridescent scales catching the light. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. Despite her alien form, there was an undeniable beauty to her movements. "Greetings, Jordan of Earth," Lyra said, her voice a melodic hiss. "I am to be your partner in this demonstration." Jordan swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the weight of his task. "Hello, Lyra. I'm honored to share my culture with you. Shall we begin with the concept of courtship?" Over the next several hours, Jordan guided Lyra through various human customs. He explained the significance of gift-giving, demonstrating with a simple origami flower he crafted from provided paper. "In human culture, we often give tokens of affection to those we're interested in," Jordan explained, offering the paper creation to Lyra. The Tarian female examined the flower with fascination, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air around it. "This serves no practical purpose, yet it brings pleasure?" Jordan nodded, encouraged by her interest. "Exactly. It's a symbol of care and attention." As they progressed, Jordan introduced the idea of shared meals. Using the earth ingredients provided, he prepared a simple dinner, explaining each step to an attentive Lyra. "Humans often bond over food," Jordan said as they sat down to eat. "It's a time for conversation and connection." Lyra's eyes widened as she tasted the various dishes. These flavors, they are unlike anything in Qatarian cuisine. How strange, yet intriguing. Their conversation flowed more easily as the meal progressed. Lyra shared insights into Qatarian history, explaining the origins of their combative mating rituals. Jordan listened intently, recognizing the importance of understanding and respecting her culture, even as he introduced his own. As the simulated day turned to evening, Jordan broached the subject of physical affection. "Humans often express caring through touch," he explained, slowly extending his hand. Lyra regarded his outstretched palm with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. After a moment's hesitation, she extended the tip of her tail, wrapping it gently around Jordan's hand. The contact sent an unexpected shiver through both of them. Jordan felt a tingling warmth where Lyra's scales met his skin, while Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. "This sensation," Lyra murmured, "it is not unpleasant." As night fell in their simulated environment, Jordan explained the concept of sleeping arrangements. Lyra, puzzled by the idea of separate sleeping areas, coiled herself near the chamber's entrance while Jordan retired to the provided bed. Lying in the darkness, Jordan's mind raced. He'd made progress, but the true challenge lay ahead. Tomorrow he would need to demonstrate the physical act of human mating to a species that had only known violence in reproduction. As sleep began to claim him, Jordan's last thoughts were of Lyra. He couldn't shake the memory of her tail wrapped around his hand, or the look in her alien eyes as she tasted human food for the first time. Despite the vast differences between their species, a connection was forming. In the morning, the High Council would reconvene to assess their progress. Jordan knew that the fate of Earth-Qatarian relations hung in the balance. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety for what the new day would bring. The first rays of simulated sunlight crept through the window, rousing Jordan from his slumber. As his eyes fluttered open, he was startled to find Lyra coiled near his bed, her intense gaze fixed upon him. Her scales shimmered in the soft morning light, creating an almost hypnotic effect. "Good morning, Jordan of Earth," Lyra greeted, her sibilant voice tinged with curiosity. "I have been observing your sleep cycle. It is fascinating." Jordan sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Good morning, Lyra. I hope I didn't snore," he said with a nervous chuckle. Before Lyra could respond, a chime echoed through the chamber. A holographic display materialized, showing the stern faces of the High Council members. "Human Jordan, Lyra," the lead counselor addressed them. "We have convened and reached a decision. Your experiment shall continue, but under increased scrutiny. We believe it is time to escalate the demonstration." Jordan's heart raced as he processed the counselor's words. He knew this moment would come, but the reality of it still sent a jolt through his system. The counselor continued, You will now proceed to demonstrate physical intimacy. We must see the full extent of human mating practices. As the hologram faded, Jordan turned to Lyra, noticing a flicker of uncertainty in her alien eyes. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. Lyra, he began, his voice gentle but firm. Before we proceed, there's something crucial we need to discuss. Consent and personal space. Lyra tilted her head, her forked tongue flicking out in curiosity. Explain these concepts, Jordan of Earth. Over the next hour, Jordan carefully outlined the human understanding of bodily autonomy and the importance of mutual agreement in physical interactions. Lyra listened intently, her serpentine body coiling and uncoiling as she processed this new information. So, in human mating, there is no combat to establish dominance, Lyra asked, her voice a mix of confusion and intrigue. Jordan shook his head. No, Lyra, it's about mutual pleasure and connection. May I show you? At Lyra's nod, Jordan slowly extended his hand, placing it gently on her shoulder. The contact sent a visible ripple through Lyra's scales, eliciting a surprised hiss from the Tarian. This sensation, Lyra murmured, it is pleasant, different from the adrenaline of combat, yet stimulating. Encouraged by her response, Jordan guided Lyra through various forms of non-sexual physical affection. They attempted a hug, which proved challenging given their anatomical differences. Lyra's sinuous body wrapped around Jordan in a loose embrace, her scales cool against his skin. As the day progressed, Jordan introduced more intimate forms of contact. He demonstrated the human act of kissing, explaining its significance in expressing affection. Lyra, lacking lips in the human sense, used the soft tip of her tail to caress Jordan's face in return. The unexpected tenderness of the gesture sent a shiver down Jordan's spine. Their explorations were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Zix, the chief Katarian xenobiologist. The doctor conducted a series of non-invasive scans, muttering to himself as he analyzed the results. Fascinating, Dr. Zix declared. While your physiologies are vastly different, there appear to be no immediate health risks to either party. You may proceed with caution. With the doctor's approval, Jordan and Lyra resumed their intimate exploration. Jordan carefully explained the concept of erogenous zones, demonstrating on Lyra's body. He discovered certain areas where her scales were highly sensitive, eliciting soft, pleasurable hisses when gently stroked. Lyra, growing more confident, began to reciprocate. Her tail and elongated fingers explored Jordan's body with increasing boldness, learning which touches evoked positive responses. As simulated night fell once again, the air in the chamber grew thick with tension. The High Council, recognizing the progress made, granted them privacy for the remainder of the night cycle. Jordan's heart pounded as he realized they were approaching the final step in demonstrating human mating practices. He gazed into Lyra's alien eyes, seeing a mix of anticipation and nervousness that mirrored his own. Just as they were about to cross the final threshold of intimacy, a piercing alarm shattered the moment. Red lights flashed throughout the chamber as the door burst open, revealing a squad of armed Katarian guards. Halt, the lead guard commanded. By order of the High Council, this experiment is suspended. Human Jordan, you must come with us immediately. As the guards surrounded him, Jordan caught a glimpse of Lyra. Her body was coiled tight, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and concern. What's happening? Jordan demanded as he was ushered out of the chamber. The guard's response chilled him to the bone. A rival faction has launched an attack on the capital. They oppose any change to our mating traditions. The situation has become volatile. Jordan's mind raced as he was led through winding corridors. He had come to Kataria Prime as a diplomat, hoping to negotiate a trade agreement. Now he found himself at the center of a cultural revolution, with the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. As Jordan was thrust into a secure room, his last thought was of Lyra. Their eyes had met briefly as he was taken away, and in that moment, he saw a depth of emotion he never expected to find in an alien being. Whatever happened next, Jordan knew that their connection had set in motion events that would reshape Katarian society forever. Isolated and uncertain, Jordan could only wait, his mind filled with questions about the conflict raging outside and Lyra's fate. The diplomatic mission he had embarked upon had evolved into something far more complex and potentially dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Jordan paced the confines of the secure room, his mind racing with thoughts of Lyra and the chaos unfolding beyond the walls. The sudden shift from intimate exploration to crisis left him reeling, uncertain of what would come next. His reverie was shattered as the door burst open, revealing a squad of Karian guards. Their scales were mottled with stress patterns, eyes darting nervously. "Human Jordan, we must move you immediately," the lead guard hissed. "The situation has escalated." As they hurried through winding corridors, the distant sounds of energy weapons and shouted orders echoed ominously. Jordan's heart pounded as he realized the full scope of the conflict. "What exactly is happening?" he asked, struggling to keep pace with the long-limbed Katarians. The guard's response was terse. "The traditionalists have launched a full assault on the government complex. They oppose any changes to our mating rituals. Your presence has become controversial." They descended into a vast underground bunker, its walls humming with protective energy fields. Jordan was ushered into a Spartan chamber, where he found himself face-to-face with members of the High Council. "Human Jordan," the lead counselor addressed him, voice grave. "The situation is dire. The traditionalists, led by the warrior Khazar, seek to undo all we have accomplished. We require your assistance." Jordan's brow furrowed. "How can I help? I'm not a soldier." "No, but you possess knowledge we lack. Human military tactics may provide an advantage against the traditionalists." After a moment's hesitation, Jordan nodded. "I'll do what I can." The Tarians outfitted him with a sleek energy weapon, its unfamiliar weight both thrilling and terrifying. A crash course in its operation left Jordan feeling only marginally prepared for what lay ahead. As they prepared to join the fray, Jordan's thoughts turned to Lyra. "What about Lyra? Is she safe?" The counselor's expression shifted. "Lyra has been summoned to assist in quelling the uprising. Her skills as a warrior are needed." Jordan's chest tightened at the thought of Lyra in danger, but he pushed the feeling aside. There was work to be done. They emerged into chaos. The once pristine halls of the government complex were scarred by weapon fire, the air thick with acrid smoke. Jordan found himself thrust into a squad of loyalist soldiers, their scales overflowing with battle readiness. "Follow my lead," Jordan called out, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. He led them through the complex, employing hit-and-run tactics that caught the traditionalists off guard. The Katarians, accustomed to direct confrontation, marveled at the effectiveness of Jordan's strategy. As they fought their way toward a critical communications hub, Jordan's mind raced. He knew that controlling information flow could turn the tide of battle. With a series of hand signals, he directed the squad to flank the hub's defenders. The ensuing firefight was intense but brief. Jordan's unorthodox tactics threw the traditionalists into disarray, allowing the loyalists to secure the hub swiftly. As the last enemy fell, Jordan's Katarian allies regarded him with newfound respect. "Your methods are unconventional," one soldier hissed, "but undeniably effective." Jordan allowed himself a small smile as he set about disrupting the traditionalists' communication network. With their ability to coordinate attacks severed, the tide of battle began to turn. Across the complex, Lyra fought with fierce willpower. Her powerful tail sent opponents flying, her energy weapon cutting swaths through traditionalist ranks. Yet even as she battled, her thoughts kept returning to Jordan. The human's gentleness and compassion had awakened something within her, a longing for connection beyond the battlefield. As reports of Jordan's exploits reached her, Lyra felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. She redoubled her efforts, cutting a path through enemy lines with singular purpose. She had to reach him, to ensure his safety. The conflict reached its zenith as Jordan found himself face-to-face with Khazar, the traditionalist leader. The massive Tarian warrior loomed over Jordan, his scales gleaming with battle lust. "Human," Khazar spat, "you defile our traditions with your presence. I challenge you to single combat as our ancestors decreed." Jordan knew that refusing would undermine everything he had worked for. He raised his weapon in acceptance. keenly aware of the watching Terrians on both sides. The duel that followed was a clash of worlds. Khazar's raw strength and natural weapons were fearsome, but Jordan's human agility and adaptability kept him one step ahead. He ducked and weaved, using the environment to his advantage. A broken console became cover, a hanging cable, a momentary distraction. As the fight wore on, Jordan saw frustration growing in Khazar's eyes. The Qatarian warrior had never faced an opponent like this, one who refused to meet strength with strength. Jordan waited for his moment, then struck. A precise shot disarmed Khazar, sending his weapon clattering across the floor. Jordan stood over his fallen opponent, energy weapon trained on Khazar's head. The chamber fell silent, all eyes fixed on the human. In that moment, Jordan made a choice that would reshape Tarian society. He lowered his weapon. "This doesn't have to end in death," Jordan said, extending a hand to the stunned Tsar. "There's room for both our ways, if we're willing to learn from each other." The silence stretched, broken only by the distant sounds of battle. Then slowly, hesitantly, Tsar reached up and clasped Jordan's hand. As Khazar rose to his feet, Lyra burst into the chamber, her eyes widening at the scene before her. She saw Jordan and Khazar standing together, surrounded by a mix of loyalists and traditionalists, all weapons lowered. "Stand down, Yoram," Khazar called out to his followers, his voice carrying authority even in defeat. "The human has proven himself worthy of our respect." As the fighting subsided, the High Council convened an emergency session. Jordan, Lyra, and Khazar stood before them, an unlikely trio united by the day's events. The lead counselor's voice rang out. "Today we have witnessed the potential for change, for growth. Human Jordan has demonstrated not only the effectiveness of his species' methods, but also the power of mercy. We propose a compromise." Jordan listened as the council outlined their plan, a blend of human and Qatarian practices that would preserve tradition while embracing new ideas. As the session concluded, he found himself standing beside Lyra on a balcony overlooking the Qatarian capital. The city bore the scars of battle, but there was a palpable sense of hope in the air. Jordan turned to Lyra, seeing a mix of emotions in her alien eyes. "So," he said softly, "I guess our experiment isn't over after all." Lyra's tail curled around his waist, a gesture that now felt natural. "No," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I believe it's only just beginning." As they gazed out at the alien landscape, both human and Qatarian felt the weight of the task ahead. Their actions would shape the future of two species, a responsibility as thrilling as it was daunting. The journey ahead would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But in that moment, standing together, they were ready to face whatever challenges awaited. As the sun rose over the Qatarian capital, casting an alien glow across the scarred cityscape, Jordan and Lyra stood hand in hand before the High Council. The chamber buzzed with anticipation as the lead counselor outlined their next steps. "In light of recent events," the counselor began, "we have decided to establish a dedicated cultural exchange program. You two will spearhead this initiative from a new facility on the outskirts of the city." Jordan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "We're ready to continue our work," he said, glancing at Lyra. Her scales shimmered with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "We will not disappoint you," she added, her tail curling around Jordan's waist. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jordan and Lyra were escorted to their new home, a sleek structure that blended human and Qatarian architectural styles. Inside, they found an array of familiar and alien amenities, carefully curated to meet both their needs. As they settled into their new surroundings, Jordan couldn't help but feel a sense of unreality. Just days ago, he had been a diplomat on a routine mission. Now he was at the forefront of an interspecies cultural revolution. "This is really happening, isn't it?" he mused aloud as they explored their new living quarters. Lyra's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "Indeed it is," she replied, her alien eyes meeting his. "Are you having second thoughts?" Jordan shook his head. "No, just processing it all. We have a big task ahead of us." Their work began in earnest the next day. After much discussion with the council and Dr. Zix, they decided to document their physical interactions for scientific study. The decision was not made lightly, and Jordan felt a mix of excitement and trepidation as they set up the recording equipment. "Are you sure you're comfortable with this?" he asked Lyra as they prepared for their first session. She nodded, her scales shifting to a deeper hue. "It is necessary for our research, and I trust you, Jordan." Their initial focus was on the human concept of foreplay. Jordan began by explaining the importance of building anticipation and arousal, his hands hovering just above Lyra's scales. "In human intimacy," he said, his voice low and steady, "touch is often as much about what you don't do as what you do. It's about creating tension, desire." As he demonstrated running his fingers lightly along the edges of Lyra's scales, he noticed an unexpected reaction. The color and texture of her skin began to change, shifting through a rainbow of hues. "Lyra," he breathed, "are you feeling okay?" She let out a soft hiss of pleasure. "Yes, I've never experienced anything like this before." Their discovery led to a flurry of excitement among the xenobiologists. Dr. Zix arrived the next day, eager to study the phenomenon. "This is groundbreaking," the doctor exclaimed, examining Lyra's changing scales. "We had no idea Tarian physiology could respond in this way to external stimuli." As their research progressed, they received an unexpected visitor. Xar, the former traditionalist leader, arrived at the facility, his massive frame filling the doorway. "I am here to observe," he announced, his voice gruff. "As agreed." Jordan nodded, extending a hand in welcome. "We appreciate your willingness to participate, Khazar." The Tarian warrior's presence added a new dynamic to their work. At first he watched their interactions with barely concealed disgust. But as days passed, Jordan noticed a softening in Khazar's demeanor. One evening, after a particularly intense session exploring Tarian erogenous zones, Xar approached Jordan. "I may have been hasty in my judgment," he admitted, his scales rippling with discomfort. "Your methods, while strange, seem to bring a depth of connection I had not considered possible." Before Jordan could respond, an alert sounded throughout the facility. Dr. Zix's voice came over the intercom, urgent and excited. "Jordan, Lyra, please come to the lab immediately. We have visitors." They hurried to the laboratory, finding it occupied by a group of tall, willowy beings with large liquid eyes. Dr. Zix gestured excitedly. "Allow me to introduce the Xyloxian delegation," he said. "They've come to observe our work." The lead Xyloxian stepped forward, its movements fluid and graceful. "We are most intrigued by your research," it said, its voice resonating directly in their minds. "Our telepathic abilities may provide valuable insights into the emotional aspects of your work." As they integrated the Xyloxians into their research, Jordan and Lyra's relationship continued to deepen. Their sessions became more intense, more intimate. But with this growing closeness came new challenges. One morning, Jordan awoke to find Lyra in a state of agitation, her scales pulsing with vivid colors. "Lyra, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching out to her. She recoiled, her body coiling tightly. It's my mating cycle," she hissed. "I can feel it beginning. I don't know if I can control myself." Jordan's heart raced as he realized the implications. They were entering uncharted territory, where Tarian instincts clashed with human sensibilities. As Lyra's breathing quickened, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was both thrilling and terrifying, Jordan knew they were about to face their greatest challenge yet. Jordan's heart raced as he processed Lyra's words. Her mating cycle had begun, and the intensity in her eyes spoke volumes about the primal urges now coursing through her body. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "We need to inform Dr. Zix," Jordan said, reaching for the communication panel. "This is exactly why we're here, to study and understand these processes." Lyra nodded, her scales rippling with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Yes, you're right. But Jordan, I've never felt like this before. It's overwhelming." Within minutes, Dr. Zix arrived at their quarters, medical kit in hand. The xenobiologist's eyes widened as he observed Lyra's state. "Fascinating," he muttered, before addressing them both. "We must proceed with caution. This is an unprecedented opportunity, but also a potentially dangerous situation. After a brief examination and discussion, they decided to move forward with a controlled mating attempt. The research facility's main laboratory was quickly prepared, recording equipment set up to capture every detail of what could be a historic event in human-Ktarian relations. As Jordan and Lyra entered the lab, the air was thick with tension. Lyra's scales had taken on a shimmering quality, her body radiating heat. Jordan felt a mix of scientific curiosity and genuine affection as he approached her. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, reaching out to touch her arm. Lyra's response was a low, rumbling purr. "Yes, Jordan. I trust you." They began slowly, with Jordan gently caressing Lyra's scales as they had done in previous sessions. But this time, something was different. As his fingers traced the contours of her body, Lyra's scales began to change. A soft, pulsating light emerged from beneath them, casting a gentle glow around the room. "Dr. Zix," Jordan called out, his voice filled with awe. "Are you seeing this?" The xenobiologist's voice crackled over the intercom. "Incredible. Continue, but proceed with caution. We're monitoring your vitals closely." As they progressed in their intimate exploration, the bioluminescence intensified. Lyra's entire body seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light, bathing the lab in a soft, ethereal glow. Jordan felt a strange tingling sensation where his skin made contact with hers. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Dr. Zix's voice, now urgent, filled the room. "Stop immediately. We're detecting an unknown biochemical reaction. Separate now." Jordan and Lyra reluctantly pulled apart, both breathing heavily. As they did, Jordan noticed a thin, shimmering film on his hands where he had touched Lyra's scales. Dr. Zix burst into the lab, accompanied by a team of medical staff. "We need to run tests immediately," he said, ushering them towards separate examination areas. "This substance, it's unlike anything we've seen before." Over the next few hours, Jordan and Lyra underwent a battery of tests. Blood samples were taken, brain activity monitored, and the mysterious substance coating Lyra's scales was carefully collected for analysis. As the initial results came in, Dr. Zix called an emergency meeting with the High Council. Jordan and Lyra, still reeling from their interrupted encounter, found themselves facing a panel of concerned Ktarian officials. "The substance appears to be a powerful hormone," Dr. Zix explained, gesturing to a holographic display of molecular structures. "It shares similarities with human oxytocin, but its potency is off the charts. We're concerned about potential health risks and addictive properties." The lead counselor's voice was grave as he addressed Jordan and Lyra. "In light of these findings, we have no choice but to suspend the mating experiments until we fully understand this phenomenon. For your own safety, you'll need to be kept under medical observation, separately." Jordan felt a pang of distress at the thought of separation. He glanced at Lyra, seeing his own concern mirrored in her eyes. As medical staff led them to isolated quarantine rooms, Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had been set in motion. In the days that followed, both Jordan and Lyra experienced intense withdrawal-like symptoms. Fever, restlessness, and an overwhelming sense of longing plagued them. Through the observation window of his quarantine room, Jordan watched as teams of scientists bustled about, analyzing data and debating theories. Meanwhile, word of the bioluminescent reaction spread through the Ktarian population like wildfire. Young Tarians, fascinated by the idea of a gentler, more intimate form of mating, began experimenting in secret. The concept of touch-based intimacy, so foreign to their combat-oriented culture, sparked a quiet revolution. As Jordan lay in his isolation chamber, his thoughts kept returning to that moment in the lab. The connection he had felt with Lyra transcended physical sensation. It was as if their very essences had begun to merge. He wondered if she was experiencing the same sense of loss and longing that consumed him. Little did he know that across the facility, Lyra was grappling with similar emotions. Her scales, once vibrant and shimmering, had dulled to a muted gray. She curled her tail around herself, trying to recreate the comforting touch she now craved. Outside their quarantine rooms, the political landscape was shifting. Khazar, the former traditionalist leader, saw an opportunity in the chaos. He approached the High Council with a proposal, his voice carrying the weight of his former authority. We cannot ignore this development, Khazar argued, but neither can we abandon our cultural identity. I propose a compromise, a controlled study of this new mating method, conducted by Ictarians for Catarians. The council, desperate for a solution that would appease both the curious youth and the conservative elders, agreed to Khazar's proposal. As preparations for these new experiments began, Jordan and Lyra remained isolated, their futures uncertain. The arrival of the Xyloxian delegation added yet another layer of complexity to the situation. Their telepathic abilities offered new avenues for understanding the emotional and psychological aspects of the bioluminescent phenomenon. As the facility buzzed with activity, Jordan found himself standing before the High Council once again. Lyra was beside him, their first reunion since being separated. The lead counselor's voice was solemn as he addressed them. "We've made a decision," he announced. "The mating experiments will resume, but under strict controls and constant supervision. Your work will continue, but with a new focus, inducing and studying the bioluminescent reaction in a controlled environment." Jordan looked at Lyra, seeing a mix of excitement and apprehension in her eyes. As they prepared to return to their research, both knew that they stood at the precipice of a discovery that could reshape the very nature of interspecies relationships. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with scientific challenges and political minefields. But in that moment, as their eyes met, Jordan and Lyra felt ready to face whatever came next, together. As Jordan and Lyra prepared to return to their research, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The High Council's decision to resume the mating experiments under strict controls brought both excitement and trepidation. Dr. Zix wasted no time in developing a specialized containment chamber for the next phase of their study. The room, a marvel of xenobiological engineering, gleamed with advanced sensors and monitoring equipment. "This chamber will allow us to safely observe and measure every aspect of your interaction," Dr. Zix explained as he led Jordan and Lyra on a tour of the facility. "The containment field will prevent any unexpected spread of the bioluminescent compound." Jordan nodded, his eyes scanning the intricate array of technology surrounding them. "It's impressive, Doctor, but I can't help feeling a bit like a lab rat." Lyra's scales rippled with a mix of amusement and nervousness. "At least we're in this together," she said, her tail brushing against Jordan's leg. The day of the experiment arrived with a flurry of activity. As Jordan and Lyra entered the chamber, they could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on them. The door sealed with a soft hiss, leaving them alone in the sterile white room. "Are you ready?" Jordan asked, turning to face Lyra. She nodded, her scales already beginning to shimmer with anticipation. "As ready as I'll ever be." They began slowly, their movements tentative at first. Jordan's fingers traced the now familiar patterns along Lyra's scales, eliciting a soft purr from her throat. As their physical connection deepened, a faint glow began to emanate from Lyra's body. Outside the chamber, Dr. Zix and his team watched intently as data streamed across their monitors. "Bioluminescent compound production increasing," one of the scientists reported. "Levels are within expected parameters." Inside, Jordan and Lyra were oblivious to the scientific observations. Their world had narrowed to the points where their bodies met, each touch sending sparks of sensation through their nervous systems. The soft glow intensified, bathing them in a pulsating light that seemed to match the rhythm of their heartbeats. As their intimacy grew, so did the intensity of the bioluminescence. The room filled with a radiant, otherworldly light that shifted and swirled around them. Jordan felt a familiar tingling sensation where his skin met Lyra's scales. But this time it was accompanied by a warmth that seemed to spread through his entire body. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. The containment field surrounding the chamber began to fluctuate, its energy patterns distorting wildly. "What's happening?" Dr. Zix demanded, his fingers flying over the control panel. One of the technicians looked up, panic in his eyes. "The energy output from the reaction is interfering with our systems. It's causing a cascading failure." Inside the chamber, Jordan and Lyra remained lost in their connection, unaware of the chaos unfolding around them. Their bodies continued to pulse with the intense bioluminescence, the light growing brighter with each passing moment. As the facility's power systems faltered, emergency lockdown procedures initiated automatically. Blast doors slammed shut, sealing off sections of the research center. Dr. Zix and his team found themselves trapped in the control room, frantically working to stabilize the situation. "We need to shut down the experiment," one of the scientists shouted over the blaring alarms. Dr. Zix shook his head, his eyes fixed on the monitors. "We can't risk interrupting the process now. The energy buildup could be catastrophic if released suddenly." As the crisis escalated, Czar burst into the control room, his massive frame filling the doorway. "What's the situation?" he demanded. Dr. Zix quickly briefed him on the unfolding disaster. Czar's eyes narrowed as he considered their options. "I may have a solution," he said, his voice gruff. "There's an experimental Tarian energy-dampening device in the weapons research lab. It might be able to contain this." Without waiting for a response, Czar turned and charged out of the room, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly through the facility's winding corridors. Meanwhile, word of the event spread rapidly through the Tarian capital. Crowds began to gather outside the research facility, their voices rising in a mix of fear and curiosity. Security forces struggled to maintain order as both protesters and supporters clashed. Inside the chamber, Jordan and Lyra's physical union reached new heights of intensity. Their bodies were now completely enveloped in the bright bioluminescence, the light so intense that the monitoring cameras could barely penetrate it. Czar returned, the energy-dampening device clutched in his massive hands. Working quickly with Dr. Zix, they calibrated the device and activated it, directing its output toward the containment chamber. For a moment it seemed to work. The intensity of the bioluminescence diminished slightly, and the fluctuations in the containment field began to stabilize. But then, something unexpected happened. The energy-dampening field interacted with the alien compound, creating a new stable energy field around Jordan and Lyra. This field began to expand, pushing against the confines of the containment chamber. "It's breaking through," Dr. Zix shouted, his voice tinged with equal parts fear and excitement. The energy field burst from the chamber, expanding rapidly through the facility. As it touched the Tarians in its path, they reported strange sensations, a sense of calm, increased empathy, and a feeling of connection to those around them. Outside, the expanding field reached the gathered crowds. The angry shouts and confrontations suddenly ceased as the energy washed over them. Former adversaries found themselves looking at each other with new understanding, the barriers of ideology and tradition momentarily swept away. In the control room, Dr. Zix and his team watched in amazement as the readings from the expanded field defied all their previous models. "This is unprecedented," he murmured, his scientific curiosity overriding his concern for the moment. The Xyloxian delegation, observing from a safe distance, suddenly became agitated. Their large liquid eyes widened as they sensed a massive surge in telepathic activity centered on Jordan and Lyra. "We must speak with your leaders immediately," the lead Xyloxian said, its mental voice resonating with urgency. "What we're detecting could have far-reaching implications for both our species." As the energy field continued to expand, reaching further into the Tarian capital, the High Council convened an emergency session. They debated fiercely whether to attempt to shut down the experiment or allow it to continue under observation. Back in the chamber, oblivious to the transformative effect they were having on the world outside, Jordan and Lyra's union reached its climax. The bioluminescent glow enveloping them intensified to a blinding level, then suddenly dissipated. As the light faded, the energy field collapsed, leaving the couple exhausted but unharmed. In the stunned silence that followed, Dr. Zix and his team cautiously approached the chamber. As they opened the door, they found Jordan and Lyra intertwined, their bodies still faintly glowing. The air around them seemed to shimmer with residual energy. "Are you all right?" Dr. Zix asked, his voice filled with concern and scientific curiosity. Jordan blinked, slowly becoming aware of his surroundings. I think so," he said, his voice hoarse. "What happened?" Before Dr. Zix could answer, Czar stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You may have just changed everything," he said, his voice low and intense. The High Council is demanding a full investigation. As Jordan and Lyra struggled to process what had occurred, the implications of their union began to unfold around them. The research facility buzzed with activity as scientists scrambled to collect data and analyze the lingering effects of the energy field. Outside, the Qatarian capital was in a state of upheaval. The wave of empathy that had swept through the population left behind a populace grappling with new perspectives and questioning long-held beliefs. As night fell, Jordan and Lyra found themselves in a quiet observation room, still under close monitoring. The faint glow of their skin served as a constant reminder of the profound experience they had shared. "What do you think will happen now?" Lyra asked, her tail curling around Jordan's waist. Jordan shook his head, his eyes fixed on the city lights visible through the window. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have a feeling our work here is just getting started." As they sat in contemplative silence, the soft glow of their bodies mingling in the darkness, the future of human-Qatarian relations, and perhaps the future of both species, hung in the balance, forever changed by the power of their union. As Jordan and Lyra sat in contemplative silence, the soft glow of their bodies mingling in the darkness, they could sense the weight of change settling over the Qatarian capital. The city lights twinkled beyond the window, a stark contrast to the otherworldly luminescence emanating from their skin. Their moment of quiet reflection was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. Dr. Zix entered, his eyes wide with a mix of scientific curiosity and concern. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice low, "but the High Council has requested your presence. There are developments we need to discuss." Jordan and Lyra exchanged glances, a wordless communication passing between them. They rose together, their movements synchronized as if drawn by an invisible thread. As they followed Dr. Zix through the facility's corridors, they noticed subtle changes in the behavior of the Qatarian staff. Where once there had been wary glances and hushed whispers, now there were looks of wonder and even tentative smiles. The High Council chamber was abuzz with activity when they arrived. Council members huddled in small groups, their conversations intense and animated. As Jordan and Lyra entered, a hush fell over the room. The lead counselor stepped forward, his expression grave. "We've been monitoring the situation closely," he began. "The energy released during your union has had far-reaching effects on our population. We're seeing changes in social dynamics, shifts in perception. It's unprecedented." Dr. Zix cleared his throat, drawing attention to the datapad in his hands. "Our preliminary studies show that the bioluminescent compound is altering Tarian physiology at a cellular level. A small percentage of the population, primarily those in close proximity to the original experiment, are developing new sensory organs. They're capable of detecting and emitting low levels of bioluminescence themselves." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Jordan felt a surge of responsibility, mixed with a touch of apprehension. "What does this mean for your people?" he asked. The lead counselor's gaze was piercing. "It means we stand at a crossroads. These changes could reshape our entire society. We need to understand them, control them if possible." Lyra stepped forward, her scales shimmering with nervous energy. "We want to help," she said, her voice firm. "Whatever we can do to ensure these changes don't harm your people." Jordan nodded in agreement, an idea forming in his mind. He took a deep breath, knowing his next words could have far-reaching consequences. "What if we created a controlled environment?" he suggested, "a place where willing Qatarian couples could safely explore these new practices under human guidance?" The chamber erupted into heated debate. Some council members recoiled at the suggestion, while others leaned forward, intrigued. The lead counselor raised a hand, silencing the room. "It's a bold proposal," he said, his eyes narrowing, "and not without risk. But given the circumstances, it may be our best option for understanding and managing these changes." After hours of intense discussion and planning, the High Council approved Jordan's initiative on a trial basis. As they left the chamber, exhausted but relieved, Jordan noticed Lyra examining her scales with a puzzled expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. Lyra held out her arm, revealing intricate patterns that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the corridor. "I'm not sure," she said, her voice a mix of wonder and uncertainty, "but I think I'm changing." Dr. Zix, overhearing their conversation, approached with his scanner at the ready. "Fascinating," he murmured as he examined Lyra. "Your DNA appears to be undergoing subtle alterations. It's possible this is a result of your prolonged intimate contact with Jordan." As they made their way back to their quarters, Jordan and Lyra passed a group of young Tarians engaged in animated discussion. One of them, a female with striking violet scales, was demonstrating a gentle caress to her captivated audience. "That's Vex," Dr. Zix explained in a low voice. "She's become quite popular among our youth. She's been organizing demonstrations, teaching others about the touching and embracing she's observed from you two." Jordan watched the scene with a mix of pride and trepidation. He could sense the excitement in the air, the potential for change, but he also knew that not everyone would welcome this shift in Itarian culture. As if on cue, a gruff voice cut through the chatter. "This is madness!" Khazar pushed through the crowd, his massive frame tense with anger. "You're weakening our people with these soft human practices." Vex stood her ground, her eyes flashing. "We're evolving, Khazar. Embracing new ways of connection doesn't make us weak. It makes us stronger." The two factions faced off, the air thick with tension. Jordan stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Lyra placed a restraining hand on his arm. "This is their conflict to willpower," she said softly. "We can guide, but we can't force change." As they watched the heated exchange, news of a Xyloxian offer to mediate the growing conflict reached them. The High Council's response was cautious, wary of outside interference in Qatarian affairs. Jordan turned to Lyra, his expression determined. "We need to do something," he said. "Show them that this isn't about weakening their culture, but about strengthening connections." Lyra nodded, her scales shimmering with willpower. "A public demonstration," she suggested. "Let them see the beauty and strength of our bond firsthand." Their proposal to the High Council was met with reluctance, but ultimately accepted as a potential way to ease tensions. As preparations for the public event began, Dr. Zix burst into their quarters, his eyes wide with excitement. "The genetic changes in Lyra," he said breathlessly. "They're accelerating. There are signs that her reproductive system is adapting, becoming more compatible with human physiology. This could mean—" Jordan finished the thought, his voice barely above a whisper. "Human Qatarian hybrids might be possible, naturally." The implications of this discovery hung in the air, adding another layer of complexity to their already precarious situation. Days later, Jordan and Lyra found themselves standing on a specially constructed stage in the heart of the Qatarian capital. Thousands of Tarians had gathered, their scales glittering in the fading light of day. Supporters and opponents alike waited with suspenseful pause. As Jordan took Lyra's hand, he could feel the familiar tingle of energy between them. Slowly, deliberately, they began their intimate demonstration. Their movements were graceful, each touch deliberate and meaningful. As their connection deepened, a soft glow began to emanate from their bodies, visible to the entire crowd. Gasps of wonder and murmurs of astonishment rippled through the audience. Even Xar, standing at the edge of the crowd with his arms crossed, couldn't hide the look of amazement that crossed his face. The glow intensified, bathing the square in a warm, pulsating light. Jordan and Lyra were lost in their connection, oblivious to the transformative effect they were having on those around them. As the demonstration reached its peak, the air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. In that moment, as the light of their union washed over the gathered Qatarians, the future of their society hung in the balance. The power of Jordan and Lyra's interspecies bond was undeniable, a beacon of change in a world on the brink of transformation. Transformation. The power of Jordan and Lyra's interspecies bond was undeniable, a beacon of change in a world on the brink of profound transformation. As their connection deepened, the soft glow emanating from their bodies intensified, bathing the gathered crowd in a mesmerizing light. The Tarians watched with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. their scales shimmering in the ethereal radiance. Suddenly, the energy field generated by Jordan and Lyra's union began to spread beyond the stage. Those closest to the couple felt a sudden rush of unfamiliar sensations. Aggressive instincts melted away, replaced by a wave of empathy and understanding that rippled through the crowd. Vex, her violet scales now pulsing with a faint luminescence, stepped forward. Her eyes wide with wonder, she called out to the audience, "Who among you wishes to experience this marvel for themselves?" Several young Tarians, both supporters and skeptics, moved toward the stage. Jordan, momentarily breaking his connection with Lyra, guided them into pairs. "Remember," he said, his voice calm and reassuring, "focus on gentle touches. Let yourselves be open to new sensations." Under Jordan's instruction, the volunteers began to explore the human-inspired practices of physical affection. At first, their movements were awkward and hesitant, but as they continued, something remarkable occurred. Their bodies began to emit a faint glow, reminiscent of Jordan and Lyra's bioluminescence. Dr. Zix, who had been observing from nearby, rushed forward with his monitoring equipment. "Extraordinary!" he exclaimed, his fingers flying over the controls of his datapad. "The bioluminescent reaction is replicating itself in other Qatarian physiology." The crowd surged forward, eager to witness this unprecedented phenomenon. Murmurs of awe and excitement filled the air as more Qatarians began to experiment with gentle touches, their scales lighting up in response. Khazar, standing at the edge of the gathering, watched as his support base wavered. His massive frame tensed, eyes narrowing as he saw centuries of Qatarian tradition being challenged before him. In a sudden move, he strode towards Vex, his voice booming over the excited chatter of the crowd. "You think these soft human practices make us stronger?" he growled. "I challenge you to prove it in the ancient way. Face me in combat." A hush fell over the assembly. Vex turned to face Khazar, her newly awakened empathy allowing her to sense the fear and uncertainty beneath his bravado. "I accept your challenge," she said, her voice steady, "but with one modification. This duel ends when one of us yields voluntarily. No death, no permanent harm." Khazar's eyes widened in surprise, but he nodded his assent. The High Council members present quickly convened, their hushed discussion punctuated by gestures towards the glowing Tarians around them. After a brief deliberation, they approved the modified duel. As a ring was hastily prepared near the stage, Jordan and Lyra's demonstration paused. The couple watched with a mixture of concern and hope as Vex and Khazar faced off. The residual energy from the bioluminescent field continued to influence the spectators, tempering the usual bloodlust that accompanied such confrontations. The duel began with Khazar launching a series of powerful attacks. Vex, drawing inspiration from Jordan's earlier demonstrations of human combat techniques, focused on evasion and redirection. She ducked under Khazar's swinging arms, using his momentum against him. As the fight progressed, both combatants began to exhibit signs of bioluminescence. Their scales emitted a faint glow that intensified with each exchange. The crowd watched in awe as the duel transformed into an almost dance-like display of light and motion. Suddenly, Khazar faltered, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar sensations coursing through his body. Vex, seeing an opportunity, moved in. But instead of striking, she wrapped her arms around Khazar in an embrace. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the point of contact, momentarily blinding the onlookers. When the light faded, Khazar and Vex stood locked in a mutual hold, both glowing intensely. Khazar's voice shook as he spoke. I yield," he said, his words barely above a whisper. "Not out of defeat, but understanding." The crowd erupted in a cacophony of shocked exclamations and excited chatter. The High Council members, their faces a mix of amazement and concern, called for an immediate recess to discuss the implications of what they'd witnessed. As the gathered Qatarians buzzed with excitement and confusion, Dr. Zix approached Jordan and Lyra, his expression grave. "We need to talk," he said urgently. "The data I've collected, it's not just individual Qatarians being affected. The bioluminescent reaction is altering the planet's ecosystem at a molecular level." Jordan and Lyra exchanged a look of shock. The realization dawned on them that their actions had set in motion changes far beyond what they had ever imagined. As they followed Dr. Zix to a quiet corner to discuss his findings, the fate of an entire planet hung in the balance. The Tarian capital, once a bastion of rigid tradition, now pulsed with the gentle glow of a populace on the brink of transformation. In the coming days, Jordan and Lyra would face the monumental task of guiding the Tarians through this period of radical change while grappling with the ecological consequences of their union. The journey ahead promised to be unlike anything they had experienced before. The news of the planet-wide ecological changes sent shockwaves through the Tarian capital. As Jordan and Lyra followed Dr. Zix to a quieter area, they could feel the electric atmosphere of excitement and uncertainty that permeated the air. The bioluminescent reaction isn't just affecting individual Tarians, Dr. Zix explained, his voice hushed but urgent. It's altering the entire ecosystem at a molecular level. We're seeing changes in plant life, animal behavior, even the soil composition. Jordan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. How widespread is this? Initial data suggests it's spreading rapidly, Dr. Zix replied, tapping on his datapad. We're detecting bioluminescent signatures across nearly 30% of the planet's surface already. Lyra's scales shimmered with concern. We need to inform the High Council immediately. As if on cue, a messenger approached them, his scales pulsing with urgency. The High Council requests your presence, he announced. They've reconvened to discuss the recent events. The trio made their way to the council chambers, passing through corridors filled with animated discussions and speculation. When they entered, they found the council members in a state of hardly restrained agitation. Dr. Zix, Jordan, Lyra, the head counselor greeted them, her voice strained. We've received reports of unprecedented changes occurring across our world. We need your insights. For the next several hours, they engaged in intense discussions with the council. Dr. Zix presented his findings, while Jordan and Lyra shared their experiences and observations. As the gravity of the situation became clear, the council members' expressions shifted from concern to perseverance. Finally, the head counselor rose, her decision made. In light of these extraordinary circumstances, we must take equally extraordinary measures. We hereby announce a series of reforms to guide our society through this period of transformation. The reforms were sweeping and bold. Traditional combat rituals would be maintained, but alongside them, the council would introduce human-inspired mating practices. Catarians would be free to choose their preferred method of courtship and reproduction. To manage these changes, the counselor continued, we're establishing a dedicated task force. Jordan and Lyra, given your unique perspective and connection to these events, we ask that you serve as key advisors. As word of the reform spread, the capital erupted into a frenzy of activity. Young Catarians, emboldened by the council's decision, began openly experimenting with gentle touches and embraces. The air hummed with excitement and the soft glow of newly awakened bioluminescence. Vex, still radiating from her duel with Khazar, quickly emerged as a leader in this new movement. She approached Jordan and Lyra, her eyes bright with purpose. Will you help me organize workshops? There's so much interest, but we need guidance to do this safely and respectfully. Jordan nodded, feeling a mix of pride and trepidation. Of course, we'll need to be careful, though. This is a big change for your people. As they began planning the workshops, they were surprised by an unexpected visitor. Khazar, his massive frame seeming somehow smaller, approached them hesitantly. I wish to learn, he said, his voice gruff but sincere. These new practices. Show me. The sight of Khazar, once their staunchest opponent, now seeking understanding, was a powerful symbol of the changes sweeping through Tarian society. His influence brought many traditionalists to cautiously explore the new customs. Meanwhile, Dr. Zix coordinated with a team of scientists to monitor the spreading bioluminescent phenomenon. Reports came in daily of new developments, flowers that glowed in the dark, nocturnal animals displaying altered hunting patterns, even changes in the mineral composition of certain rock formations. The Xyloxian delegation, fascinated by these developments, approached the High Council with a proposal. We offer our expertise in xenobiology, their lead scientist said. Let us establish a joint research initiative to study these effects across species. The council agreed, and soon a multi-species scientific consortium was formed, with researchers from various worlds arriving to study the unique phenomenon occurring on Taria Prime. Amidst all this activity, Jordan and Lyra found their relationship deepening. The shared experience of guiding a society through such profound changes brought them closer together. However, their personal joy was tempered by growing concern over Lyra's accelerating genetic mutations. Dr. Zix called them to his lab, his face a mix of excitement and apprehension. The latest tests show significant changes in Lyra's reproductive system, he explained. Theoretically, it's now compatible with human physiology. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Jordan and Lyra exchanged a look of shock and wonder. The possibility of natural conception between their species opened up a new world of questions and potential. As news of this development spread, it sparked intense debate among both humans and Catarians. The High Council, while excited by the possibilities, also recognized the need for caution. They implemented regulations on human-Catarian pairings, emphasizing the importance of maintaining genetic diversity while further research was conducted. The changes on Taria Prime did not go unnoticed by the wider galactic community. Diplomatic envoys from various worlds began arriving, some eager to learn from the Tarian experience, others wary of the potential spread of the bioluminescent phenomenon to their own planets. The situation grew more complex with the arrival of a team of diplomats and scientists from Earth. Their presence added a new layer of tension as they questioned the wisdom of allowing such profound changes to occur without broader consultation with humanity. Caught in the middle of these swirling tensions, Jordan and Lyra made a bold decision. They announced their intention to undergo a public commitment ceremony, blending human and Catarian traditions. We hope this ceremony will serve as a symbol of unity between our species, Jordan explained to a gathered crowd, his hand intertwined with Lyra's. A demonstration of the beautiful possibilities that arise when we open ourselves to new connections. As preparations for the ceremony began, Jordan and Lyra threw themselves into their work with renewed vigor. They led workshops, advised the High Council, and worked tirelessly to address the concerns of both humans and Tarians. However, not everyone welcomed these changes. A group of extremist traditionalists, viewing the new practices as a threat to Catarian identity, launched a series of violent attacks on facilities associated with the reforms. The attacks sent shockwaves through the capital. Jordan and Lyra found themselves working around the clock with security forces to protect the fragile peace they had helped build. As the date of their commitment ceremony drew near, they realized that their union had become a focal point for both supporters and opponents of the new order. The fate of human-Tarian relations and the future of Taria Prime itself seemed to hang in the balance. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing cityscape, Lyra turned to Jordan, her scales shimmering with a mix of emotions. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked softly. Jordan took her hand, feeling the familiar tingle of energy between them. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that what we've started here, it's too important to give up on." As they looked out over the city, where points of bioluminescent light danced and swirled in patterns never before seen on Taria Prime, they knew that their journey was not nearly finished. The ceremony loomed ahead, a beacon of hope for some, a target for others. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond a living testament to the power of connection across the stars. As Jordan and Lyra stood on the balcony, their moment of quiet reflection was shattered by a series of distant explosions. Alarm klaxons blared through the city, bathing the bioluminescent glow in harsh red light. "What's happening, Nahane?" Jordan asked, instinctively pulling Lyra closer. Before she could respond, Dr. Zix burst onto the balcony, his scales flashing with urgency. "It's the Pure Claws," he panted. "They've launched coordinated attacks across the city." Lyra's eyes widened. "The research facilities?" Dr. Zix nodded grimly. "And the educational centers. They're targeting everything associated with the new practices." A thunderous boom shook the building. Jordan peered over the railing to see a plume of smoke rising from a nearby structure. "That's the ceremony venue," Lyra whispered. her voice tight with shock. As they watched, the night sky above the capital began to shimmer. A translucent dome of energy materialized, encapsulating the city. The planetary defense system, Dr. Zix explained. The High Council must have activated it to contain the situation. Jordan's mind raced. The attacks, the rising tensions. It was all coming to a head. He turned to Lyra and Dr. Zix, his expression resolute. "We need to end this," he said. "Not with force, but by showing them what these changes truly mean." He outlined his plan quickly. A mass demonstration of the new mating practices, broadcast planet-wide. Dr. Zix's eyes lit up at the research potential, while Lyra looked both excited and apprehensive. "It's risky," she said, "but it might be our best chance." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Jordan presented his plan to the High Council, his words passionate and persuasive. After heated debate, they agreed, designating a large arena on the outskirts of the capital for the event. As word spread, Tarians from all factions began converging on the capital. The city buzzed with anticipation and tension. Jordan caught glimpses of Pure Claw sympathizers, their faces set in iron will, mingling with supporters of the new practices, their bodies already emitting a soft glow. The Earth delegation cornered Jordan as he was helping to set up the arena. "This is too dangerous," the lead diplomat insisted. "We're prepared to evacuate you immediately." Jordan shook his head. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm seeing this through. What's happening here is too important." As the appointed hour approached, Jordan found Lyra in a quiet corner of the arena. Her scales shimmered with a mix of excitement and nerves. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. She took his hand, a spark of energy passing between them. "With you? Always." They stepped out into the arena together, facing a sea of Tarian faces. The air crackled with tension and possibility. Jordan took a deep breath and began to demonstrate the basics of human intimacy, his movements slow and deliberate. As they progressed to more intimate touches, the familiar glow began to build between them. It spread outward in pulsing waves, washing over the audience. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Inspired by the display, couples in the audience began to mimic their actions. The bioluminescent energy built upon itself, creating a cascading effect that swept through the arena. Even some of the traditionalists found themselves caught up in the moment, their ingrained combat instincts giving way to gentler impulses. The energy in the arena reached unprecedented levels. Satellite imagery displayed on massive screens showed waves of light spreading across the Taria Prime's surface. The combined bioluminescent output was affecting flora, fauna, and even the planet's atmosphere. In the midst of this phenomenon, a familiar figure stepped forward. Khazar, his massive frame now radiating a soft glow, addressed the crowd. "I was wrong," he boomed, his voice carrying across the arena. "These changes are not a threat to our people, but a new path forward. I call upon all Tarians to embrace this unity." His words had an immediate impact. Many Pureclaw members visibly hesitated, their purpose weakening in the face of Khazar's transformation. As the event reached its climax, Jordan and Lyra completed their mating ritual. The resulting burst of bioluminescent energy was blinding, overloading their arena's monitoring equipment and visible even from orbit. When the light faded, a profound silence fell over the arena. Tarians of all factions stood united, bathed in a shared glow. The Pure Claws, their aggression dissolved by the overwhelming display, began surrendering to the authorities. In the aftermath, Jordan and Lyra found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Zix excitedly shared preliminary data showing planet-wide ecosystem changes. The High Council announced plans for a constitutional convention to formally integrate the new practices. As news spread throughout the galaxy, representatives from various alien species began arriving on Taria Prime. The planet was quickly becoming a hub of interstellar cultural exchange. Amidst the celebration, however, troubling reports began to surface. Other planets were experiencing unexplained bioluminescent phenomena. As Jordan and Lyra prepared to face these new challenges, they knew their journey was not nearly finished. The galaxy was changing, and they were at the heart of it all. The bioluminescent phenomenon that had transformed Kataria Prime was no longer confined to a single world. As Jordan and Lyra stood on the balcony, their attention was drawn to a series of urgent communications flooding in from across the galaxy. "It's happening everywhere," Lyra said, her scales pulsing with a mix of excitement and concern. "The changes we've seen here are spreading to other planets." Jordan nodded, his mind racing with the implications. "We need to act fast. This could lead to panic if we don't manage it properly." They hurried to the High Council chambers, where they found a flurry of activity. Representatives from Earth and various alien species had already gathered, their faces etched with worry and curiosity. Dr. Zix burst into the room, his scales flashing with urgency. "The data is clear," he announced. "The bioluminescent energy is adapting to different planetary ecosystems. We're seeing reports of glowing flora on Rigel 7, altered mating behaviors among the crystal beings of Altair, and even changes in the atmospheric composition of gas giants in the Andromeda sector." The High Council, in conjunction with the gathered representatives, quickly formulated a plan. Within hours, the Interstellar Bioluminescent Research Institute, IBRI, was established, with Jordan and Lyra appointed as its chief ambassadors. "Your experience will be invaluable," the Earth delegate told them. "You've lived through these changes firsthand. You can guide others through the process." As preparations for their galactic tour began, Jordan and Lyra found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. They underwent intensive briefings on the cultures and biologies of the affected worlds, their minds stretching to encompass the vast diversity of life in the universe. The day of their departure arrived with little fanfare. As they boarded their ship, a sleek vessel designed for long-range interstellar travel, Jordan felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. "Ready for this?" he asked Lyra as they settled into the cockpit. She entwined her tail around his arm, sending a familiar spark of energy between them. "As long as we're together," she replied. Their first stop was Xarxis Prime, a world of towering crystalline structures and beings of pure energy. As they stepped off their ship, they were greeted by a dazzling display of light and color. The Xarxians, typically aloof and difficult to communicate with, had been profoundly affected by the bioluminescent energy. "We feel connected," a Xarxian elder communicated directly into their minds. "For the first time, we understand the concept of touch, of physical intimacy. It's overwhelming." Jordan and Lyra spent days working with the Xarxians, demonstrating techniques for managing the new sensations and emotions. They watched in awe as the crystalline beings learned to express affection through intricate patterns of light and energy. Their next destination was Gliesa 667 cc, a world of massive fungal forests and symbiotic lifeforms. Here they found a society in turmoil. The bioluminescent energy had disrupted ancient symbiotic relationships, forcing the inhabitants to forge new connections. "Change is never easy," Lyra addressed a gathering of concerned Gleasons, "but it can lead to beautiful new possibilities." Over the following weeks, they guided the Gleasons through the process of adapting their mating practices. The result was a stunning display of bioluminescent spores that danced through the air, creating new life forms of unparalleled complexity and beauty. As they traveled from world to world, Jordan and Lyra's bond deepened. Each new challenge they faced together, each alien culture they helped guide through the changes, strengthened their connection. They discovered that their own bioluminescent energy adapted and grew stronger with each encounter, allowing them to communicate more effectively with a wide range of species. On the gas giant Kepler 7b, they encountered a civilization of floating, balloon-like beings. The bioluminescent energy had altered the very atmosphere they inhabited, creating swirling patterns of light that the Keplerians used to express complex emotions and ideas. "It's like they've developed a whole new language," Jordan marveled, as they floated among the Keplerians in specially designed suits. Lyra nodded, her scales shimmering in response to the patterns around them. "And we're learning it together." Their journey took them to the far reaches of known space, each world presenting unique challenges and opportunities. On some planets, they were welcomed as saviors, the harbingers of a new age of understanding and connection. On others, They faced resistance and fear, echoing the early days of change on Kataria Prime. Through it all, Jordan and Lyra remained steadfast in their mission. They shared their experiences, guided new couples through the intricacies of gentle intimacy, and worked tirelessly to ensure that the spread of bioluminescent energy brought harmony rather than chaos. As they prepared to return to Kataria Prime, they received an urgent message from Dr. Zix. His voice crackled with excitement over the interstellar communication channel. "You need to see this," he said. "Something incredible is happening here. The bioluminescent energy. It's evolving. It's becoming something more." Jordan and Lyra exchanged a look of surprise and anticipation. Their journey had taken them across the galaxy, but it seemed the greatest discovery was waiting for them back home. As they set course for Kataria Prime, the ship's sensors detected a massive surge of bioluminescent energy emanating from their homeworld. Whatever was happening, it was clear that their mission was just getting started. The galaxy was changing, and they were at the heart of a transformation that would reshape the very nature of life and connection across the universe.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.